My friends, Rolls-Royce are best known for making some of the finest internal combustion engines we've ever seen. Not just the perfectly smooth V12s of the modern era, but some of the first ever internal combustion engines, and even engines used in World War II aircrafts. And from that storied history and innovation of engineering has come a completely different product. And that is this, the fully electric Rolls-Royce Spectre. And don't think that this is some kind of a side project or an afterthought just to satiate the climate fanatics like it is in a lot of manufacturers. Rolls-Royce say that this is actually the purest version of what they think the luxury car should be, as they intend to go genuinely fully electric in less than a decade. So this is the first sign of what they are planning with the brand. Now, whether this is the purest interpretation of the Rolls-Royce is something that we will critique today. And to do that, we will go through the history of Rolls-Royce, how we wound up to this Phantom Coupe successor today called the Spectre. I will also show you under the skin, like no one else has, how this car works and what has gone on under the skin. We will check out the interior, which is predictably absolutely gorgeous in typical Rolls-Royce fashion, and then go for a drive and answer the question, is this still a proper Rolls-Royce? Can it still provide that legendary luxury waft of all the previous cars? And more importantly, can this still be considered the best car in the world, like the original, as an EV? Let's find out today as we dive into this, the brand new Rolls-Royce Spectre. Guys, our sponsor for today's Spectre video is a product that this video literally would not be possible without, or at least it would be super difficult for me. I'm going to share some of the secrets behind the scenes of RBR with you with this, and that sponsor is Synology. Now, the average project folder size at RBR is around about 300 GB. The Spectre one is no different in order to get you guys the best videos possible. Now, you imagine over the last 7 and 8 years, that's a hell of a lot of footage, and I would go through drives like these like Skittles. Thankfully, we then found Synology and their incredible NAS drive system that allowed us to not just store the data, but literally create an RBR cloud that I could access from anywhere in the world at speed, download from older videos, get VFX from older videos, and access any data I wanted from any browser or my phone. It's been a game changer in terms of data access. For example, I can head into here, go into Network Drive. You can see I've got the folders in there with all of my data easily accessible, and that can be done through any browser, like I said, as long as you have the login as well. So instead of having a tower of these things, all I needed was my Synology drive, and you can start with one drive or you can upgrade to a multitude of them. And then, like for me, when I'm looking for data, I can just have one place I'm looking for rather than trying to guess which hard drive had it, labeling them, etc. It's literally been a game changer. And then at home as well, I've been able to put all of our media files, movies, family videos, photos, etc. all can be stored on the Synology, and then I can access it anywhere. So I'm sure many of you can make great use of this at home and as professionals as well. And I've left a link to Synology store plus a few how-to guides. It's actually quite easy to set up, even an idiot like me could do it. And I just highly recommend it because, like I said, ease of edit and speed of edit at the channel wouldn't be possible without them. A huge thanks to Synology for supporting this episode. Let's get back to the car. So guys, here is the world's first ultra luxury electric super coupe and spiritual successor to the Phantom, the Rolls-Royce Spectre. Fully electric Rolls. Now, this idea of Rolls going fully electric is something that us petrol heads are getting quite used to, as every manufacturer is basically aiming for this, right? And we're used to now bemoaning the fact that we're going to lose our wonderful and characterful ICE engines in favor of stillness and quietness. But when it comes to Rolls-Royce, one of the hallmarks of all of their engines was stillness, quietness, and fluidity of motion. And these were goals their engines have always tried to achieve, and these are goals that are contrary to the basic nature of a combustion engine to be rumbly and grumbly. Now, to really understand why the battery electric vehicle might be the ultimate form of the Rolls-Royce, we actually have to go back in time till before when the company was actually formed. Now here we are in the 1900s, and this was an interesting time because when it came to the motor car, there was no one tech that was prevailing. So they were kind of split between steam-powered, combustion, and indeed electric as well. Now before the company was born back then, Charles Rolls was a part-time engineer. He was an importer of cars. He was a part-time racer as well. This was a man who was born into money. He had his first car at the age of 18, being the son of a lord and a lady. And he actually broke the world speed record at an unheard of 83 miles per hour in his youth, right? And he was even involved with aviation and was linked to the Wright brothers and did things with them, something that would actually eventually spell his demise that we'll get onto in a minute. But it was around about this time, just after he broke that world speed record, that he met Henry Royce. And I'll get onto their meeting in Manchester in a second. Let me fill you in a little bit about Henry. So Henry was a man of a much different upbringing, right? Namely, being poor. His father was made bankrupt when he was a kid and hence sent to jail, as was the law back then, so weird. And the poor boy had to fend for himself as a paper boy. As he grew older, he showed aptitude in engineering, specifically electrics, and eventually he would make his own company, and in fact he would actually supply electric motors to electric car companies of that time. And he had this great quote that I really resonate with, where he said, "Strive for perfection in everything you do, take the best that exists and make it even better." And I know a lot of us will resonate with that, but it was that ethos that drove him to overwork himself. And it was during one of these downturns when he was stressed out that he took notice of the automotive industry and said, there's no innovation here, like it needs to be better. It was around about this time that Henry bought a 10 HP car called the de Courville, and he found it to be poorly built. So he made his own car, a 10 HP one, based on a similar platform and tried to improve it by testing and trying to make it better, as was his motto. And around about this time, our friend Rolls on the other side was frustrated in importing foreign cars because he found them to be poorly built. So a mutual friend set up this meeting between Rolls and Royce. And it's funny that this mutual friend would eventually become the hyphen between the two of them. And when Rolls saw Royce's 10 HP car, he came back and told his friend that I've just met one of the world's greatest engineers and I want to sell his cars to the whole world. Now, the guy who set up this meeting was a guy called Claude Johnson, who was the ex-secretary of a Royal Automotive Club. He was a marketing and publicity genius, and he would eventually become the first MD of Rolls-Royce, and really the one to push it to be what it is today. So a deal was struck with the money, the funding, and the connections to come from Rolls, the engineering prowess and the genius to come from Royce, and the publicity and the marketing to come from Claude Johnson. Johnson was instrumental, like I said. He convinced Royce to go with a single model approach, which is when the 4050 was born, that they later named the Silver Ghost. He also convinced Royce that we need to have a mascot, hence the Spirit of Ecstasy was born. More on that later. One of Johnson's most brilliant ideas was taking that 4050 Silver Ghost and taking it on a 14,500 mile singular trip, by which the end of it, members of the press were saying that the Rolls-Royce must be the best car in the world. It was really quite genius. Rolls used to love then taking one of their engines while it's running, putting a glass of water on it and watch people's reactions when not a single drop would fall from it. Again, taking that idea of an engine that's not really behaving like an engine, right? He would die shortly after that, actually. But he left us with a really eerie prophecy that I want to share with you guys. He, at that time, tried an electric car called the Columbia, and this is what he said. The electric car is perfectly noiseless and clean, there's no smell or vibration, and they should become very useful when fixed charging stations can be arranged. How eerie of a prophecy is that, looking at this car today? Heck, Johnson even marketed the early Rolls cars as combustion cars, as smooth and as quiet as electric cars back then, and Royce dedicated most of his career to making combustion engines that would be noiseless and quiet and with like this endless gear feeling, so you wouldn't feel when the gears were changing. Every manufacturer these days is shifting through their archives, trying to find some mention of electric or something to justify what they're doing. But genuinely with Rolls-Royce, they've always tried to negate the effects of the combustion engine, of the gearbox within the interior. And I mean, come on, look at those old videos of the penny balancing perfectly on the Rolls-Royce engine. Proof of this actually lies on just how far back Rolls started thinking of the electric car. I'm going to skip past the whole battle of who bought Rolls-Royce, VW and BMW and everything. We'll maybe cover that another day. Let's go back to Geneva Motor Show 2011, where they showed this Phantom concept car, which had a 71 kilowatt battery, rear mounted electric motor, and took days and ages to charge. But they did this to see what they would think of the electric car in a Rolls or the electric setup, what their customers would think, what the general press would think as well. This was early days when really no one was thinking about this. Shortly after this, in 2016, came a totally bizarre one, which was the Rolls-Royce Vision Next concept, which, as you can see, super duper futuristic, and it featured a AI spirit of ecstasy in the interior who would drive you to where you want to go. Like, really forward thinking, particularly with the AI thing today. Now you may ask, why was the Spectre so late to the party, considering how early they were thinking of it? Well, it actually wasn't. If we look at the modern Rolls-Royce architecture that all the cars are built on, which is the all-aluminium architecture of luxury, they began making that platform in 2014, with the first car to come out in 2017 in the Phantom. And that platform was pre-engineered to A, make variants like the Cullinan, but also to incorporate the battery electric vehicle architecture as well. So they were thinking about this quite early. And it is that process then that led eventually, finally, to the Spectre. And a proper Rolls-Royce it is, particularly in design. No zany shapes here, no craziness. If you put a standard Ghost in its place, you would hardly recognize the difference. It's a commanding design brought straight from the past into today. We've got the widest Rolls-Royce grille that we've ever had. The vanes of that Pantheon grille are now smoother in order to guide air around the motor's front as is needed. But they have modified some things. For example, the spirit of ecstasy that has been on Rolls-Royce cars for 111 years by the time the Spectre came out, since 1911. It's seen a change in shape to be more aerodynamic, so it doesn't mess with the 0.25 aerodynamic figure that this car has. And they spent 830 hours in a wind tunnel just to get that right, which just blows my mind, the level of detail they went into for this car. The double light is an obvious reference to the Phantom Coupe, though it does remind me a little bit of its sibling in the BMW 7 Series. And then you have that strong waft line, as you would find on boats, etc., still existing within our long coupe here. The pillarless doors are almost 5 foot in length. They are the longest of any in Rolls-Royce history and are seriously impressive to look at. And then we have our lights on the rear, which are in a neutral, almost jewel-like look to allow for customer specs to look their best. Now the chassis and the rigidity is actually different to the combustion cars. We still got the double-skinned bulkheads that help reduce noise, etc., and make refinement better, like the combustion cars do, but now we've also got a double-layered floor, which increases rigidity by 30%. We've got the largest deep draw part of aluminium that they've ever used. It's like 13 foot long from the A-pillar all the way to the back. Insane. Now, how is it powered? Predictably, you've got a large battery, 102 kilowatt usable battery. We've got permanently synchronous electric motors, small one on the front, a more powerful one on the rear, altogether making 584 brake horsepower, 900 Newton meters, and a 0 to 60 of 4.4 seconds. This entire thing, the components, etc., quite similar, shared with the 7 Series BMW in some ways, but that car is a lot more powerful, well over 600 brake. But speed and power is not what Rolls are looking for. They're looking for an EV that is going to last decades, just like their combustion cars. There's a totally different goal at play here. And in that sense, I think it makes a lot more sense to me for Rolls-Royce. The range is said to be 329 miles WLTP. In the winter months, I'm getting 260 miles quoted, so probably not too far off in reality when we come into the warmer months. Is that acceptable for a car looking 10, 20 years into the future? We'll discuss that when we go on a drive. Now, the most important part of a Rolls-Royce is the ride, and Rolls-Royce describes the Spectre's ride as Rolls-Royce in HD. I guess what they mean is that it's even sharper than it's ever been before in terms of the focus, right? And how have they done this? Well, Rolls-Royce 3.0, which is their modern ethos, if you like, relies heavily on loads of computer computations, which manages all of the chassis systems in order to give the most perfect ride that they can manage depending on road quality, weather, etc., etc. And the components are all then controlled by that. What components do we have? It's kind of based on the Ghost's planar suspension system. So we've got obviously adaptive air suspension, we've got active dampers, we've got anti-roll stabilization, which is active, we've got all-wheel steering as well, and all of this is controlled by that intelligence to give you that carpet smooth Rolls-Royce ride that the Spectre claims to have. So ignoring the electrical components in terms of everything else, it's a proper Rolls-Royce. It's Rolls-Royce 3.0 using everything that the combustion cars do. And it's only about 200 kg heavier than the equivalent combustion variant. But weight isn't really important in a car like this, so all of that can take a back seat. What I do find interesting though is that a facelifted or a new version of the Ghost has been released, and it still has the V12. It's got a mildly updated design that I think brings it more in line with Spectre, particularly on the front end. And it comes with all the interior upgrades like the Spirit system inside and more bespoke options now available for Ghost. So they haven't completely abandoned that side yet. It's probably a smart thing to do, even if this is meant to be the future. Now, a massive part of the Rolls-Royce experience is, of course, the interior. How can we ignore it? Let's jump in and check out every gorgeous detail of the Spectre. Now, the doors of the Spectre are actually quite cool, like most Rolls-Royces. You just give it a tug and the door will begin to open for you as it is. And if you want to close it, all you have to do is push the little button on the side here and the door will close itself for you. Right, my friends, let's head inside of Spectre now. Give it a tug and unveil one of the most stunning open doors that you'll ever see of a vehicle, with the massive, massive coach doors in the Spectre, now with starlight within them as well, which I will show you in a moment. An initial glance at the interior, and it is indeed wholly Rolls-Royce, including your Starliner headboard that we'll talk about in a moment. But it's not just that, it's just the general material feel, like the chrome on our side entry sills here, even the railings where our seats are, the seat buttons, the deep pile of the carpets here, and the leather cushion. There is not a singular part, even the hidden parts of this car, which aren't lined with some type of fabric or material that would put most manufacturers to shame. Of course, the front seat automatically will move forward, nothing surprising there. And you've got still quite a spacious rear, particularly in terms of width, arm room, leg room, compared to your usual two-door coupes with a couple of seats in the back. And as we jump in, we push down our brake pedal and the coach doors close themselves. So of course the doors, such an eventful part of owning a Rolls-Royce, particularly these coach doors, which then close themselves when you push the brake. But beyond that, what I've gotten used to when I try the latest and greatest EVs is that whether it's the outside or the inside, they're always trying to be these ultra modern designs. And if it's not on the outside, if someone still remains fairly traditional on the outside, they will go mental on the inside and just make it completely different to all their combustion cars. Whereas I'm pleased to say that is not the case. In fact, it's much the opposite, where they seem to have gone out of their way to make things as classically Rolls-Royce as they possibly could. Now, that's not to say that it hasn't got an up-to-date digital system, but it is to say that every other touch point is still unmistakably Rolls-Royce. And that is the first thing that I want to share with you. It is the touch, the feel, and the sounds of the Rolls-Royce interior. Every single touch point within this car sounds and feels luxurious, whether it's the lovely vents here hiding within our wood veneer, whether it's the blower sliders for those vents, which are still classically Rolls-Royce, absolutely perfect. Even things like the lock and the unlock function, or your hazard light button, or indeed the volume rocker, or your iDrive, sorry, it is an iDrive, BMW iDrive rocker here, and every single button press that you have, every interaction that you have with this vehicle, it's a high quality piece of material on the other side of it. And that really means a lot. I think it's very, very important, even up to your handles up here. Lovely, satisfying sound and feel. So all of that is great. So your first impression as you get in the car and you're interacting with all these various parts is that this is a classical Rolls-Royce. Like, we've got our Starlight headliner, but now that's extended for the first time in the Spectre onto your door cards, not just on the front, but on the rear as well, which I will show you in a moment. Then you've got the illuminated fascia here on the passenger side, which has got, again, 5,500 separately illuminated little stars around the Spectre logo. But when the car is off, you'll never see it. And again, they've spent like 10,000 hours developing this. And you really appreciate that when you actually see it in person, because it's indiscernible. And at night, all you see is the stars. It's not like you don't mistake it for a passenger screen or something. It's really nice, and it ties in wonderfully with the other star features inside the interior. All of that is then complemented by a really subtle ambient lighting at night. Now, the interior in general is based more around the Ghost than it is the Phantom. So we haven't got the Phantom's disappearing screen. Instead, we've got the new Spirit software, which is based upon a reskinned version of BMW's operating system 8, and I'll get onto that in a minute. But the general idea around this interior is about space, not just in the front, but in the rear as well, because space is the real luxury that they're trying to tout within the interior. And you really do feel that in here. It feels like the widest car that you'll ever sit in. Like, me reaching that door on that side is an impossibility, which is why we have these wonderful door buttons here for you to be able to close both doors should you want to from this seat. We've also got the lovely Rolls-Royce Goodwood watch that sits within here, and I believe in some cars that's also customizable as well. Even touch points like your light control, so satisfying. It feels like these have come out of the 1900s. And again, it gives this car, despite being an EV, a classical feel to the modern driver that you miss in everything else. That touchy-feely, wonderful, analog feeling of interacting with what is a piece of art rather than just a bunch of screens and money saving on not using buttons. You know which manufacturers I'm talking about, pretty much almost all of them now. So yes, paying the money, you do get the value for it at the end of it with a Rolls-Royce, despite being a full EV. And as I said, this Spirit system is basically BMW's operating system 8, but redone for Rolls-Royce. Redone in what way? Well, for example, we have no interaction of climate control within the screens, which is a big bugbear for a lot of us. We don't like going through there to do our climate stuff. All of that is down here in these wonderful buttons. Very, very analog. It confused me for a while because I couldn't see what the temperature of the car was digitally. I was trying to figure it out. Then I realized, no, you have to do it the old-fashioned way and just kind of guess between the red temperature and the blue, which is fair enough. It's different. I like it. You've still got your seat heating and ventilation and steering wheel heating buttons all here as well. All of that climate element is within here. So that's not you messing around in the main system here. The main system, the home page, does have the widgets like you find in the BMW operating system, of course reskinned to suit the Spirit system, and finding vehicle apps and infotainment apps much the same. But for example, there are no driving modes, no drive setup in here. All you do is you can manage your assistance systems, and the no driving mode thing is quite interesting. We'll talk about that when I go for a drive in a second. To be honest, it's a great basis to use as an operating system. I think the BMW one is one of the better ones in the current generation. And if Rolls are reskinning that, that's absolutely fine. One cool thing is that, of course, you do get the spec of your car digitally, but your driver zone colors can match the customization of your interior. The view from back here is glorious. And of course, the same fit and finish as we found in the front, in the back of the car as well. As I said earlier, nothing skimped on, not a single area or part of this car where this doesn't feel like it's ultra premium, and that's really what you're expecting. Oh, that's nice. You can see the starlight within the back as well. I didn't actually notice that. That's a very nice touch. Got still a lot of head height here. You know, I'm around 5'10", and I'm really, really comfortable here. Loads of space in the entire seat. It feels like a proper sofa, armchair, and it's the type of environment and the type of interior that is, it's conducive to kind of having a nice conversation. It's enough space and it feels like a lounge atmosphere. And the other part perhaps overlooked is how easy it is to actually get out. It is not difficult to step your foot out and get out in quite a graceful manner. And even that aperture to get back in, you can see plenty of room to get your leg in and have a nice seat. And here another great feature I've just discovered. And look, there's a magnetic hold there. See, little things you discover while you're living with it. You don't see that on any other car pretty much. clever. And then we've got still the thick pile here within even our boot. That's kind of what you expect of this type of car. Now, of course, customization, a huge, huge thing at Rolls-Royce. They don't want any one Spectre to be the same. They want it to be as individual as their customers are. So my advice to you as a customer, when you get one of these, go balls to the wall crazy, please, because there's so many things you can do. Just on the seats, you've now got lapels that can be different color. You can have different types of stitching. You can have things like brogue shoes and all kinds of things that you can spec to your own liking. I went to HRO in Mayfair, and the sheer options available to you of leathers and trims, and then the ability to appreciate the Starlight headliner, how they do it by hand, and you can see behind the wiring, the intricacy and the time it must take to do that. It's really worth a visit to go in and actually configure your car by touching and feeling those materials. It's still such a rare thing now. And when you're spending this type of money, it's important that you really do have that experience. And you do get that at the new Rolls showrooms. And before I finish off in the interior, one of the best parts that has survived from your combustion Rolls-Royces is this, look. The hidden umbrella. It's still here in the Spectre. What a fantastic feature. Absolutely love it. Now, all great electric cars, in my opinion, have a starting up sound because A, it's safer, and B, it's kind of cool because it's nice to know when the car is on. It's nice to know when you're traveling. Now, of course, in a Rolls-Royce, you don't want to have some spaceship sounds. So the Rolls-Royce sound that you have in here, and you can turn it off if you want, is quite subtle. For example, let me show you the startup. As you can see, it kind of sounds like someone playing a piano, which is quite apt for a luxury car like this. I love the gear selector, which is like a classical pull forward and down to engage your gear. And that's it, our car is on and off we go. And that's all it is. You just have a tiny bit of sound and it kind of tells you when the car is accelerating and slowing down. And it's nice because I think that this is really a safety feature that all electric cars need to have. I love the fact that the indicators still have that classic Rolls-Royce sound as well. All of the touch and the sound points are very, very familiar to Rolls-Royce. And the most familiar sound element here is in fact the lack of sound, the silence that we have in here. This is as quiet as our modern day Ghost. Now, as we said, every single internal combustion engine made by Rolls-Royce has aimed for this idea of no disruption to the ride, the magic carpet ride, and no disruption to the driver or passengers. In that regard, they've been vibrationless, they've been pretty much without any sound despite having wonderful V12 engines, and driving Spectre now is like the ultimate form of that because we have no combustion engine that rumbles, we have no gear changes, it's just smooth power delivery all the time. Now, our lack of driving modes is going to strike you as quite weird, particularly with electric cars which have, you know, a comfort driving mode or a sportier driving mode for piling on more power, using more energy. But the lack of those modes will show you that you only need the singular mode because the car's decentralized intelligence that we keep talking about is so intelligent in understanding how you're going to drive that, of course, driving slowly and sedately is second nature to this car. But when you want to pile on speed, like I just put my foot down, for me it's indiscernible. I don't get a jerky reaction from the entire body of the car from the fact that we've just piled on 585 brake horsepower. No, it's given in a very measured way. And that's not to say it's slow either. Just because it's measured, this car can pick up speed really, really quick. And it actually amazes me just how clever this singular driving mode is, because you can go from going really, really quick down some country roads, which is a scary experience considering how wide this thing is, and then straight away to driving sedately, and the car then settles down immediately into a smoother ride. I imagine that they've spent hours and hours and hours on pedal feel, because the pedal feel is a standout thing for me in the driving here. It's so clever. It really just intuitively understands the slightest change of movement of your foot and reacts to it. Let's try the speed thing again. I like the Rolls-Royce sound. You really do pick up speed quickly, but it's smooth. For me, for the occupants, the suspension is nice and soft. I really recommend, compare this. We spoke about i7 using a lot of similar components to this car. Check, when I piled on speed in the i7, the BMW will just look like a normal car piling on a lot of speed, whereas this gives it to you in a very measured way, but you're doing the same type of speeds. And this is the difference between an ultra luxury car and just a normal luxury car. And I did say when I was driving the i7 that, oh, it's such a good luxury car, so smooth, etc. Why would you need a Rolls-Royce? There is just such a massive difference between them. For most people, yeah, for us average folk, the i7 would probably do the job. But when you want ultra luxury and you really want to be cosseted as not just the passenger but the driver as well, you cannot beat the magic carpet ride, and you cannot beat the legendary waft of the Rolls-Royce. And I know you've heard the word 1,000 times, they love that word. The waftiness of the Rolls-Royce just cannot be matched. The way that the car flies down the road, I think magic carpet is probably the best way to describe it, because you almost get this feeling like you're gliding over the surface of the road, like you're flying, a fact that I'm sure that Charles Rolls would have loved, being an aviator. And of course the credit of all of that can go to the planar suspension, which has been heavily modified from our Ghost. We've got a 30% more rigid car here that's able to do a bit more interesting turns like this, but then when you come onto a straight road, then the car will decouple the anti-roll bars and allow each wheel to then move more freely, to then adapt to the road based on navigation data, based on sensors within the car, to give you that waftiness that you've come to expect from the name Rolls-Royce, and it does deliver on that. Then when you get to more exaggerated turnings, the anti-roll bars come back into play, your adaptive suspension, your adaptive dampers, and the car will handle itself well in that scenario as well, while by no means being any type of sports car. The body control, the lack of roll, it's quite impressive for a car that is this big. The rear wheel steer really makes the car feel smaller, as you know, as these systems all do. But with a Rolls-Royce, it's even more exaggerated, because you've got this almost 6-meter car that suddenly shrinks and you're able to do these incredible short turns with it. It's really useful. And of course, driving dynamically is something that a Rolls driver is going to want to do. This is going to surprise you, but Rolls-Royce actually has the youngest buying demographic of any of the brands within the BMW group. It's crazy, isn't it? But perhaps not that crazy when you think about it. Rolls-Royce expects the buyer of this car to have at least a stable of 7, and this is like the occasional luxury cruiser. And that sounds like you or me, if we were given enough cash, we would waste it all on our perfect garage, right? And that's probably the main buyer then, given what the demographic is. So yeah, surprising. And that's why this car does need to perform dynamically as well. And that's why Black Badge is so successful as a sub-brand. It'd be really interesting to see, do they do a black badge of Spectre, and how is that going to work with that type of buyer who thinks like us? Now, the other thing that we can do is turn on the self-driving feature. Of course, future Rolls like the Next 100 displayed will maybe be fully autonomous, and the nice thing about the autonomy within this car is that it has the most sensitive steering wheel I've ever experienced in autonomous driving. Most, when you have to hold the steering wheel again, it's a matter of really grabbing it and giving it a bit of a wiggle, or at least grabbing it hard. This one is the only one I've ever experienced where you can literally just give it a little tap with your finger and it knows that you're still there. And that is luxury when it comes to automated driving as far as the current world is concerned, because I hardly need to touch it and the car will just drive itself. Then you cannot discount the ambience of this entire interior when you're just sitting here and driving or sitting. Look how much space we have. Look how big the armrests are, and every touch point, it makes me feel like I'm driving and sitting in a classical car instead of a modern EV. And that's where the value comes. That's where you forget the price tag and you remember only the quality, as they love saying, and they're absolutely right. Because this is what we want in a modern car. This is what you and I want. We look for the classical things that we loved in cars from the past, but with modern things. We don't just like a load of screens slapped everywhere to save costs and no buttons. We love buttons. And you won't find a better car on the market when it comes to tactile feel, I think, than this. And that is deservedly so, because they've spent hours and hours and hours getting this right. One thing I really love is the massive size of the side wing mirrors here. They are huge. They look like they are truck ones, but it's good because you get a really good and clear view of what's behind you. One thing that I've really had to take a lot of getting used to is the size of the A-pillar is massive. I mean, it's kind of like what you experience in super or hypercars when they have these really exaggerated A-pillars. This is a really thick one, and it's in a point of view that you're used to looking through. So again, that's something that kind of reminds you that you're in something a bit unique, something a bit coach built. The one option you do have for driving modes is the recuperation mode, which is the B button here on our steering stalk. You tap that and then it begins to recuperate, and you can have that as strong as one pedal driving, so the car completely stops, and the default setting is to mimic the combustion engine of the car, slightly slowing down. Driving the Spectre in isolation of the range figure for a minute, and I have no issues in saying that this is a superior experience to probably any other Rolls-Royce in terms of quietness, in terms of instant power and torque delivery without any interruption from any mechanics of the car. It is almost perfect in that regard. I think the road noise could still be a little bit less, but I'm nitpicking here. In terms of a luxury, quiet experience, it's better than any other luxury car you'll sit in. And not just luxury and quietness, but using that modern technology in this Rolls 3.0 era, making sure that the suspension and the pedal feel and the power delivery is all smooth, is really, really impressive. But is it altogether, including the range figure, up to Rolls-Royce standards? I'm not convinced, only because of that range figure. In reality, the figure is more than enough for most drivers, but if you're talking the ultimate car, the best car in the world, you're expecting probably a 500 mile, 600 mile range. And maybe future Spectre will have that, which will make it the perfect ultra luxury car. As it stands, 250 in the winter and probably just over 300 in the summer is good, but it's not the perfection that perhaps Henry Royce would ask for. And thanks to my history lesson, I think we all know what Henry Royce would say: keep improving, keep testing, and make it better, and strive for that perfection. But please don't think I'm being negative about it. I think that this is, despite the crash of the EV market in general, the one EV that is going to hold its value. The one EV that even 10 years from now will still make sense to own. And I cannot say that about any other EV. My biggest bugbear about all of them is they remind me of smartphones. Only the latest and greatest will ever be enough. But the quality that you find in Spectre has it a notch above all the others. It's like a normal car. It will still have value to a buyer 10, 15 years from now. And that's what really sets a Rolls-Royce apart. And in vast contrast to driving those cars that have lost big combustion engines in favour of batteries and motors, you don't miss the V12 because you never really hear the V12, or you're not meant to really discern the V12. It's not like you're looking for a rumbly engine or a thudding gear change and that type of excitement from a Rolls-Royce. It's not something that you miss while driving this car. Strangely, I think this might be my favourite EV. Favourite in the sense that it's the one electrical vehicle that I can think of that takes all the goals of its predecessor combustion car and not only achieves them, but betters them because it is an EV, and will still hopefully maintain its value long term because it still has that attention to detail and the quality that the buyer expects from the previous combustion cars. And I cannot think of any other EV that achieves that. This car currently has no rival. The i7 cannot match it. The Mercedes Maybach SUV, while nice inside, is god-awful on the outside and does not match with the heritage of that brand. Currently, this is truly the only ultra-luxury EV. And not only is it the only ultra-luxury EV, it is also truly the Rolls-Royce of EVs. I cannot wait for a future car that's even closer to perfection with hopefully 500 to 600 miles. It will be really hard to argue with the statement, best car in the world, should that happen. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed my history lesson and this first drive of the Rolls Spectre. More history lessons on Rolls-Royce to come in the future. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do like and subscribe to RBR, and I'll see you guys next time.